This is a short video to walk you through the installation of the Fabric data warehouse automation framework. So when you install this, you're going to deploy a lakehouse, a warehouse, and a SQL Server database to house all of the meta database work. So it looks something like the right-hand side of the screen, right? There's a folder called DWA that will have all your pipelines and notebooks that are used for orchestration and actually executing the payload, and some sample triggers to sort of schedule loads and operations and stuff like that. And if you choose to deploy the EventWorks, there's a sample star schema in there that comes from the financial data inside EventWorks. So for getting started, there is a wiki page here. There is a wiki site. If you click on getting started, it steps you through the instructions. The first thing that you're going to need is an empty workspace, right? So it's follow step one. So I'm going to create an empty workspace. So let's just bring up a web browser here, and I'm going to create a workspace. Let's call it student one DWA, student one demos, right? You can optionally assign it to a domain. You've got to make sure that it's on a premium or a Fabric capacity or a trial capacity. And when you do that, I've now got my workspace. I have to make sure that I give people access to it, especially if the cloud connections. Especially if there's any cloud connections that are used, the authentication account in those is going to need to have access right to the workspace. Okay, so I've just added myself as an admin. Now, once I've done that, I can then move on to step two, right? So step two is let's just go back to the wiki page. Where's it gone? Here it is. Step two, I've got to create two cloud connections. Okay, so from here I can go to the connections and gateways, and I'll create one connection that is to the Fabric SQL database, and another is to the Fabric pipelines. An important thing is when you create these connections, you have to note down the name of the connection because it will be used, but also to note that this doesn't connect to any specific workspace. It's just an entry point to connect to any SQL database. So you can share this between workspaces and environments if you want. The only problem is the authentication credentials must have access to any workspace that wants to use that. So you might want to have a different one for dev and prod, say, for example. Okay. So here's the two that I've created now. I'm now ready to move on to the next step, right? So step three, I'm going to download I'm going to click on this space, download the setup notebook, and I'm going to go to my new workspace that I've created, this one here, completely empty. I'm going to import the setup notebook, and I'm going to open it. Okay, now this is Spark notebook. Obviously it doesn't have a lakehouse bound to it because I haven't created one yet, right? So all we've got to do is I just click on run just to start the Spark session. It's just execute this, but we've got to set all the parameters to what we want. What do we want to call our lakehouse? What do we want to call our warehouse? I've just used a very generic term, but most of our projects would have a prefix on the kind of name of the project, or if there's an enterprise data warehouse, the name of the company or something like that, right? We pretty much recommend sticking to the name of Meta for the meta database because some notebooks that folks have written kind of look for that kind of name. And if you want the lakehouse to be schema enabled, and if you want the data warehouse to be case sensitive or not, we recommend that to be case insensitive. And then it will use the REST API to actually create all these artifacts, deploy the pipelines, notebooks, and the sample data. Do make sure that you change the connection name here to be equal to the connections that you created earlier in the connections and gateways. Okay, just scroll through, you can see that it uses the REST API to create a lakehouse, the REST API to create a SQL database, a warehouse, and then it goes to the GitHub site to deploy the latest version of the artifacts. So I'm just going to click run all. This could take it a while to run, right? Some cases after it creates an item, it can take it a minute or two. So there's some waits in the script to make sure that there's sufficient time to create it, right? So this is now working away. Okay, that's finished now. So I say I've got my SQL metadatabase created, my data warehouse created. It's uploaded a load of notebooks, data pipelines. It's uploaded a load of data pipelines. Now this is slightly tricky because it's had to map the connections of the pipelines from the ones at source control to the ones that are actually being used. And finally, it's created all the views and the ETL work that's needed for AdventureWorks and restored a sample set of the sort of metadata that has a working ETL that you can use to actually demo. Now, the final thing, if we go back to the guide, we've now done step 4 and 5, is to execute the TROps to populate the artifact directory. So I'll show you where that is. If we go to the workspace that we just created, I might have to refresh my push F5 to refresh it because you might not see the just created workspaces. In the triggers, there's a TROps. So typically this would be scheduled nightly. And what this does is it's a pipeline that just runs any notebooks that capture operational stuff like a dictionary of the artifacts, a dictionary of the Power BI objects and the measure definitions, stuff like that. So I'm just going to run this. It won't take it long. Effectively, while it's running, you can see that what this executes is a notebook that uses the semantic link library or the simply library to just list all the items in all of the workspaces that are used by the particular instance, and it writes it back to both the lakehouse and to the SQL database kind of at the same time. Okay, that's ran, and just to show that working, when I connect to my SQL database, so Meta is my SQL database that stores all the metadata. I'll now see there's tables that have all the metadata required to run the ETL. Like there's my configurations table, has what kind of workspaces I'm using and stuff like that. Notice that's been populated with the settings that have been installed. And in the DWA schema, there's a dict artifacts, which is the dictionary of all of the artifacts, notebooks, templates, and what their ID is, which is very important for dynamic orchestration. You've got to pass this ID as a parameter. Okay, the final thing to run is there is a AdventureWorks that will do the entire ETL. So it will extract files. Now there's an entire video going into a walkthrough of the AdventureWorks, but just to show that executing takes about 10 minutes, so I'm going to skip time a little bit. If I go into the trigger folder, see this TR AdventureWorks, I can run this, and obviously in a production environment, you would generally schedule this to run kind of nightly, overnight, or hourly, or whatever your ETL kind of schedule. So I'm just going to run this, and in the output window, we can gleefully watch the progress. There you go, that's finished now. I can see if I want to walk down the stack, I can see that the trigger, if I click on the output, I can see this called the pipeline controller. Let's go to the pipeline controller. And the pipeline controller then looped through the sequences that it had to activate and pass them on to the worker. So I think the first one here is going to be the ingest. It's going to be 200. I think this is where it brings in the CSV and the Excel files. So I click on that. You can see this actually launched to notebooks, but notice it launched them in that sort of parallel. And that should now be loaded. To see that it's loaded, I've now got my star schema. If I go into my data warehouse, into the warehouse, now I'm just using the web Data Warehouse Explorer. Obviously, in the next section where we're looking at tooling, where we'll probably recommend looking at SQL Management Studio and stuff like that. I can see I've now got what would be instantly recognized by anyone as a star schema, extracted, transformed, and loaded from the source data. Okay, that is getting started. Hopefully you can get that demo up as well.